there we go. Seems to be. I'll put it right up here.
All right.
Awesome. So, let's start with some biographical information. Where were you born?
Okay, I was born in Minneapolis.
Oh yeah?
In downtown Minneapolis at what was then only Northwestern Hospital. Now it's Abbott Northwestern with the hospital mergers and things like that.
Oh yeah.
South Minneapolis.
So you lived in Minnesota your whole life?
Well, I did up until I went off to the Naval Academy, and then from then on I spent 16 years, out and about and away from here.
Yeah.
4 years at the academy, and then 12 years on active duty, being bounced around. We moved 10 times in 12 years.
Wow.
I was like your dad. I was a pilot.
Yeah.
And so I busy going through flight training and then different assignments, going to grad school and whatnot.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. So you moved around. And then what are your parents' names?
My father's name was Gaylord, and my mother's name was Ethel.
Cool. Gaylord and Ethel. And do you have any siblings?
None. Only child.
Only child.
Yep.
Did you like that?
I don't have any choice.
True.
It's fine. I mean, there are times when I wish I had siblings, but then again, I watch my wife struggle with her siblings, and I watch my two daughters, struggle with each other or whatnot, going through. But I avoided all that.
Yeah. Each thing has their blessing, I guess.
Yeah.
So you did grow up around here. So how would you describe your childhood? Were you adventurous? Did you? What would you say? It was standard childhood or?
Pretty normal by almost any standards, I think. Active kid. I was into sports and stuff like that growing up. So I was into played football and baseball and all that sorts of things. My dad was an engineer at Honeywell here in town. My mom was a nurse. And the reason that they both worked in a time before that was really a good thing. One, I was the only child, and two, it helped them put away more money for their retirement plans.
Right.
They ended up purchasing some lake property up in northern Minnesota, up by Breezy Point, and ultimately built their retirement home there.
Wow.
So that when Dad finished up at Honeywell and things were finished enough up there, they shut things down here and sold their what was then a townhouse over in New Brighton, where they had moved to after I went off to the Naval Academy, and then moved up north.
Huh.
So, but I was active. I was busy in sports, busy in school. I had just lots of different sports activities. I was a starter in football and a starter in wrestling and a starter in baseball and things like that. So I was busy with all those typical sports.
Yeah, that's fun. Did you do any theatrical things or music?
I did. I'm in the choir. I have kind of a choir voice.
I can tell.
As opposed to my wife, who had the lead in musicals in high school and stuff like that, and our daughters, of course. But so I did that, and sang in the church choir, and was active with that sort of thing. Any theater things that I did were very amateurish and not particularly significant. But
you seem pretty well-rounded in that respect.
Well, I was big into speech and things like that. I was in extemporaneous speaking.
No way. You were?
Yeah, I was.
So I'm on the speech team.
Are you?
We love speech.
Yeah, I was into extemporaneous speaking, and then when in my senior year, we actually had a debate class. So the speech class got into debate, so I had to learn how to think on my feet, kind of thing.
Right.
Particularly useful skill to have, and very helpful.
For sure. Well, I'm sure doing extemp you're a little bit more prepared for that. I can't even do limited prep stuff. I get so scared. I just do prepared events. That's so cool. Okay, so did you always know that you wanted to be in the Navy or in?
No.
No?
My father was never in the service. He had lost a leg when he was like 20, and so he was never in any form of the service. and again, without brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And our extended family was down in Southern Illinois, so I wasn't around them. So there was, for example, there were a couple of cousins who were in the service, one in Korea and one in the Air Force, but I only knew them from afar, so wasn't much of a chance to that. So it was kind of a self-starting thing. My mom was a very important part of the things that I did, and my dad to the degree that he could, but he was much more introverted as he went through things. But what the Academy presented me was an opportunity to do something all on my own, because they couldn't do any of it for me.
Yeah.
And so that had a psychological appeal at the time. I needed that.
Yeah.
And so my grades in sports and other leadership things were all up there. So making application was
Too bad.
pretty normal thing, pretty logical extension, I guess.
That's so cool. How did your dad lose his leg?
My dad was born with a condition as a spina bifida, where his spine does not fully develop, and right down at the base of his spine, down by his tailbone, there was a gap in the spine,
Yeah.
the bones, the vertebra, and what happens then is that your spinal cord becomes somewhat exposed and less protected, and their record over the years, one, these people don't live very long normally, and two, they have all sorts of related things. Well, circumstances would have it. My dad was born in rural Nebraska, and when this condition became evident, he was taken to the University of Nebraska Hospital, and a physician there worked on him at the time and did some surgery when he was an infant that allowed him to live more or less normally.
Yeah.
Well, late in his teens, he broke a heel. One of the things that occurs for a spina bifida is that you have conditions not unlike diabetes where you don't have real good circulation. And so he didn't heal real well. He ended up with an infection, and the infection at that time, the way to treat it was to remove the limb.
Yeah.
So he lost a leg below the knee, and of course, this is all before he got married, so that's all I ever knew.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because it gave me, I think back on this every once in a while, Dad never considered himself to be disabled.
Yeah.
He was just, had one leg.
Yeah.
And so I always looked, since he didn't, and he didn't act that way, I didn't either.
Yeah.
It sort of colors my thinking now when I look at people who are, I guess the appropriate term nowadays is differently able. I understand a little bit more about what that implies.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Anyway, that's how he lost his leg. But we did all the normal things: played ball, went fishing, went hunting, all those
That's so cool.
crazy things.
That's amazing. So what would you say your life was like before the war? Was it drastically different than after it began?
Okay, well, timing-wise, I graduated high school in '63.
Okay.
And JFK was assassinated in November of '63. The war really hadn't started yet.
Yeah.
And so the attitude at the Academy and through all the people, I was going through this, what for me was an incredible life-changing experience anyway. And so then all of a sudden things started to happen, and it became pretty obvious that we were going to be quite involved in this. I got exposed to the near Washington, D.C. kind of view of the world. And remember, I'm still in my late teens and early 20s through this time frame. So the Academy infuses you with a tremendous sense of duty, and the the obligation and so forth that goes with that. So there was never a question in my mind, if I was asked to serve or go out there or do anything, I would. But I read the news like everybody else did, and went through all of this. So, you had to wonder the social media content that we have today didn't exist then.
Yeah.
So the exposure was a bit more narrow in terms of what you were looking at. The attitude of, again, I'm living on an island here at Annapolis.
Okay.
And I say that because all of the things that are going on at Berkeley or other liberal schools and places like that, that was a distant, could just barely catch a glimpse of that.
Yeah.
So that sort of influence didn't come through.
Yeah.
To me. And so I just motored along doing my thing. Tensions built. All of a sudden, people who had experience with Korea were being reminded that we were getting into another shooting conflict like that.
Right.
And it was pretty scary.
Yeah, I can imagine. What was it like when JFK was assassinated?
Well, he had come to the academy to visit that fall.
He did?
Yeah, and it was a good deal because what happened was that whenever a head of state comes to the academy, one of the things that they do as sort of an honorary deal is they pardon everybody's conduct offenses. So all of a sudden your whole slate is wiped clear. So everybody gets a clean break. So everybody's cheering, excited. But he gave a course, a wonderful talk, and then wasn't all that long after that he was assassinated, and that was totally different. And we had a group of people marching in the funeral procession and all that sort of thing, very close by. So.
Wow, that is so cool. So what were you doing prior to the war starting, or prior to your awareness of it? So you were at the Naval Academy?
I was at the Naval Academy, and I was studying to become a naval officer. As I said, for me this was because with no service background, this was totally life-changing for me.
Yeah.
I was learning a whole new way of life and trying to understand and make head or tails of that. So I kind of had my head down and was busy with that, and that was okay because that was what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I knew all along that I wanted to fly airplanes. That's the one thing my dad did do was he had actually flown airplanes, and so part of that package was that I learned to love that. Fortunately, my eyesight and things like that stayed good enough that I could do that.
Yeah, cool. Do you remember about when it was announced? I guess it was kind of like a slow progression that wasn't ever really announced, but do you remember the moment you knew we were going to war?
Yeah, Johnson had gone through, and there was this supposedly this attack on Quemoy and Matsu, which were the islands off of the coast, and the Navy was involved with it, and so all of us were very aware of the details on an unclassified sort of way that we could get through the general media. And our instructors and other people who were serving would, focus some of that and give us updates as well. So I became aware almost immediately as things started to happen and heat up quickly.
Yeah. So I guess you were in the middle, in the hub of everything anyway.
And then each successive graduating class, the first one that I was aware of was 64, sent people off, and people began to serve. Whether they were, riding ships, flying airplanes, going in the Marine Corps, whatever it may be, they were all busy doing that.
Were you deployed ever during the war?
I was, after I graduated. Then I had to go through flight training and get my wings. It was part of the 10 moves. And then I flew 4-engine reconnaissance and patrol airplanes, P-3s. And we were involved, I went on 3 deployments over there to that theater. and we would be tracking all of the shipping traffic and the various vessels trying to run guns down to the Viet Cong in the south from the north.
Wow.
And so we would fly. We would split our time between a base in the Philippines and then a base either in Vietnam or in Thailand, and all around through there.
Yeah. Wow, that's so cool. So I guess those are questions surrounding like your training.
Yep.
Could you just like describe basically your training, and if you thought it was good or bad or adequate? What was your training, and then how do you think it prepared you?
Well, my pilot training was all intended to teach me how to fly the airplane effectively and safely, and that worked. I'm still here. I always wanted to make the number of landings equal the number of takeoffs.
There you go.
It was always a goal.
Yeah.
Unlike your dad's situation, as I recall.
Yeah.
But anyway, I did that. I mean, it was there wasn't anything accelerated or anything like that. What did get my attention though during this whole time as I was going through this training was that, of course, the Soviet Union was still out there at that point in time as really the major adversary.
Yeah.
And Vietnam was there, but a lot of the Navy activity was focused on the Soviet Union because they had all the ships and submarines and stuff like that.
Right.
So we were in the Cold War era, and our airplane was designed to hunt and track their submarines.
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time learning how to do that.
And you learned.
Yep.
And it was clearly successful.
And it was, we used it. We did hunt them and track them.
Yeah, that's so cool. And what was your daily routine like, your day-to-day, like during that training?
Because our airplanes were too large to fly on and off of aircraft carriers, we always flew off of a regular airbase.
Yeah.
And the base I operated out of during that time frame was in the southern end of the San Francisco Bay Area, what's now a NASA facility, Moffett Field. And so lived in a home not too far away that we purchased. And, I go in every morning, come home every night, as long as I was not deployed.
Yeah.
Or didn't have the duty. If I had if I was a duty officer, then I got to stay on base overnight, watch over everybody.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a business thing. The thing about being a naval officer is you have two jobs. You have one to operate, so I was a pilot. I'd go flying every now and again, but not every day.
Yeah.
And then you have this other job, which is you've got some function in the squadron, whether you're a communications officer or a maintenance officer or something like that. And you have to do that every day too.
Yeah.
So that it becomes part of the routine. And then you either at that time frame you'd deploy for 6 months, and then you'd come home and you'd be home for about 10 months, and then you cycle and go for another deployment.
Yeah.
So part of the routine is either you just come off a deployment or you're getting ready to go on the next one.
Right, right.
There's a lot of turnover of personnel and things like that, so you have to retrain people and get other people ready to go.
Yeah, interesting. That's cool. And then, what kind of did you ever see any weapons and stuff during training?
Sure.
What kind? And did you learn how?
Well, our airplane carried all sorts of things. For example, we carried torpedoes and we carried things like that we could use to chase the submarines. But we also were able to drop in mines.
Wow.
And during the Vietnam conflict, one of the things that came up was they were talking about mining a harbor at Haiphong in North Vietnam.
Yeah.
And they talked very seriously about using our airplanes to do that. The problem is our airplane didn't have any way for self-protection.
Oh, really?
So if anybody came out to shoot at us,
Really?
Yeah. So well, they just didn't send us into places where people shot at you.
Right.
So they ended up using, actually, when they considered this, they ended up using the planes that your dad flew, the A6,
Yeah.
to actually do some of that work.
Yeah.
Because they also could route lines. They just couldn't carry as many as we could because we were a lot bigger airplane.
Yeah.
We carried old rockets and some other kinds of things that we practiced with. We just didn't get, we never used them in real conflict.
Oh, so cool. Do you remember any particular incidents or accidents or something interesting that happened during basic training?
Well, talking about basic training or operating?
Either.
Okay, because in training, again, everybody's trying to be safe primarily, and so that's, everybody had to go through the same kinds of syllabus, and we all had to learn and go out and how to land on an aircraft carrier and take off from an aircraft carrier just to get our wings. That's
right.
Part of the exercise. Occasionally there were some crashes and some things like that, or some people who would bang up some airplanes.
Yeah.
I remember scaring myself every now and again during the course of doing it. That's sort of normal as part of it too.
So I feel like when you're training, learning how to fly a plane, I feel like there'd be a few.
Yeah, there were, but the incidents usually occurred afterwards. After you've gotten your wings and you're out trying to operate now.
Yeah.
I lost friends. I lost classmates from the academy.
Yeah.
In the war, had prisoners of war or who were lost at sea.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll probably talk about that too later. And then, how well do you think your training prepared you for your service in Vienna?
It was great. I mean, I looking back on it, I can't find any significant fault with anything that I was taught. Again, the focus of my training was how to operate the system that I was flying as effectively as possible. It had a mission, it had things it was supposed to do, and it was my job to learn how to do that. And then as I became, in the airplane that I flew, there were 3 pilots on the airplane. So you start off as a third pilot and then become a second pilot or a co-pilot, and then ultimately you become a plane commander. And you had to acquire so many hours, you had to go on certain kinds of missions and things like that to check the box that you had this kind of experiences. And you had to pass certain tests with very experienced instructors and people like that to make sure that they were happy. Because ultimately, the airplane that I flew had a crew of 12.
Wow.
So that was one of the appeals to me, was I like working with a team. And so, but they don't want you to go out there with all these other people on there and do something stupid.
True. Cool. So you did get some good training. And then, how did your trainers enforce discipline during training? Was it very harshly?
If you there are all sorts of tests and checks and things like that. And if you didn't pass a check, you didn't move on. You just didn't progress. You didn't get the qualification, so you were not afforded the opportunity. There were a couple of people that I operated with for whom that happened. And they effectively washed out.
Really?
And you could do that at almost any level. When we first got started, there were people who didn't make it through basic flight training. Who, they got down there, they thought they wanted to fly airplanes, they started flying them around, and suddenly they
weren't so interested.
Well, they either scared themselves or they did something that they hadn't anticipated. There was some aspect of flying. It could have been unusual maneuvers or something like that. Perhaps they didn't realize how prone to air sickness they were. Or different kinds of things like that. So, but once you got your wings and were out in the squadron, well, then if you were as a plane commander, I was responsible for the whole crew. And if we were sent out on a mission and completely screwed it up, well, that didn't sit very well.
Right. That makes sense. And then so this is moving on, like, out of training more into, like, general sentiments about the war. What was your basic understanding, I guess, during that time of why the U.S. was involved in Vietnam? Because as we've been learning, it was kind of a bit of a touchy subject.
It was. First of all, remember, I'm in San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
I'm just not all that far away from some of the hotbeds of liberalism like Berkeley.
Yeah, yep.
And places like that.
Yeah.
So that message was alive and well throughout Northern California. That said, we understood that we were there because the country was trying to stop the spread of communism throughout Southeast Asia. And so the reason that we were doing this was pumped into us from time to time as we went through. I mean, here was Soviet Union, here was China, these two big, massive communist countries that were both influencing. The Russians were sailing around out in the South China Sea. The communists, the Chinese were just above us in the north. But that said, that was the rationale that was going around. That
Did you ever doubt it?
Probably, privately, maybe. I mean, there were things that came up from time to time. That's kind of screwy, but the world is full of all sorts of little things, and my lowly position in the pecking order, I didn't pretend to have all the information.
Right. So that's where you're going. There you go. And then, so just tell me about some experiences during the war. Like, I know you were pretty involved, so maybe some pertinent experiences that you had during your execution of the war.
Well, flying off of airfields rather than off aircraft carriers.
Right.
So it's a little bit different than your dad's experience, for example, flying a carrier. But we had some exciting times. We one time I was out. We had missions, 2 missions back to back over a 5-day period. Dawn to dusk was one patrol because our plane could stay up for a long time.
Right. That's a long time to be in a plane.
It is. We cooked our meals and we had a bathroom and bunk beds and stuff like that. Anyway, so dawn to dusk, two days in a row. And we'd have a day off, and then we'd fly dusk to dawn. We'd fly all night long.
Yeah.
And it was on one of those the night flights, because you couldn't see anything, so we'd stay up high and just sort of track everything going on by radar. And sort of keep little plots and so forth as what was going on. It was a rather large radar contract that came to a stop off the coast of Cambodia at the time.
Okay.
And Cambodia we're not involved officially with Cambodia at the time. And this big contact came up and stopped. And then a bunch of little contacts came up from the shore out to this big contact, obviously a ship. Saying we hadn't been briefed on anything, look out for anything like that. So we said, this is unusual. And so we're on the radio talking to home and saying, what do you want us to do? And we had on the wing of the airplane that was on, we had a searchlight. Yeah. Which had 1 million cannon power. I mean, when that thing went on, it was like having the sun come up.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, we'll check it out. We said, you want us to light them up? I said, yep. So a searchlight run is you go down, you come in at very low level, and you come right in on them, and then the co-pilot has got a little pistol grip over here, and he literally pulls the trigger on that, and it lights the thing up. Well, remember, the U.S. is not supposed to be involved with Cambodia.
Right.
The big contact was a U.S. ammunition ship, and the little contacts were Cambodian boats, and they were offloading arms and ammunition to the Cambodians.
Oh.
So all of a sudden, the mission, which we were seeing all these things that we were not really supposed to be seeing, and by the time we got home, of course, this had all been chewed on by the higher ups. So when we landed, they took us into debriefing and they said, You didn't see any of that.
Really?
Forget all of that.
Wow.
You're kind of going, you're crazy. This horse is already out of the barn.
Yeah. No one's gonna.
It's totally illogical. I mean, we didn't talk about it, and there wasn't much more going on. But that was one of the strange things.
What do you remember what year that was?
That was 1971.
Fishy, very fishy.
And then, one time I went off. Remember, we're cued in on submarines, right?
Yeah.
Well, we would take off, and we were in Cam Bay in Vietnam, which is right on sort of the middle of the east coast of Vietnam.
Yeah.
Pretty place, by the way, lovely beaches.
Really?
And we took off, and what we would do is we would then start to climb up and prance it out, and you get a radar contact, and then you go in. Our routine was to go in, visually identify the contact, and take some pictures.
Yeah.
So we took off and immediately got a radar contact not too far off the coast. So we never climbed above 500 feet. We just went in on this contact. It was a submarine.
Right there?
On the surface. I'm kind of going, there's not supposed to be any submarines here. And it was in war paint, which is to say it didn't have any markings on it. It was just all black.
Huh.
And, well, we'd have identification aids and things like that. Pretty quickly we determined that it was a British submarine. Well, there are frequencies that you're supposed to be able to contact allies on radio frequencies.
Right.
Try them all. No one talked to us. So, well, then it puts you in this awkward position of where we now have an unidentified submarine.
Right.
So, we again on the phone, calling back home, and say, "Well, Mom, what do you want me to do with this one?" And they had to launch another airplane to go finish our patrol, and because we just got started. No, that sort of thing. Anyway, meanwhile, we're staying out there and flying around, waiting for some guidance on what they're just sort of orbiting around this guy. And one of the crew members, another officer on the crew, because we listened, submarines made unique noises, and that's how you would identify them when they're underwater, is you listen for their signal, their acoustic signal.
Right.
We said, we don't have very good information on this class of submarine.
Right.
So we said, let's record something. So we came down low, and we went right across the back end of the boat and dropped what we call a sonobuoy into the water to listen to record the sounds. And we had big tape recorders. Well, the minute we dropped it in, he did a quick U-turn, and he picked up the sonobuoy. Well, on the bow, right on the front of the submarine, there were these two bow planes that normally are down when they're underwater, but they're up. He's got them folded up. And between them, he's got a big canvas bathtub filled with water. And there are these two guys out there nude that are taking a bath.
You're kidding.
And so they picked up the sonobuoy. Well, they threw it in the bathtub. Well, two things happened. First of all, it has a saltwater activated battery, so that it's still working.
Right.
And on top of that, it's also got a little orange dye marker, which turned the bathtub water orange. But then he pulls up, it's 600 feet of cable with this underwater microphone on the end of it. So he pulls it up, and suddenly they're talking. And we can hear them.
To you?
Well, they're talking to each other, but we can hear them, and very obvious British accents and all that sort of thing, so you know where they are. And the guy says, "Oh, it's the bloody Yanks." And the guy goes, "Up your arse, Yank."
Oh my God.
It was really funny. So anyway, it was sort of a comical part of the time.
Wow. So they were British.
They were.
Did you just?
Later on, finally somebody talked to somebody, and they figured out, oh yeah, he was where he was supposed to be. Well, why didn't you tell us? Because if we had known he was going to be there, we would have just gone by, said hi, and left.
So funny, chilling in the bathtub.
Then one time, our base got attacked by the North Vietnamese.
Wow.
They were commando teams, came in, and Cameron Bay was, like I say, it was a lovely place, but there was a bay that they would fly in, or they would swim in, and they swam in and came ashore, ran up, and they were trying to attack the airplanes and stuff on the base. And so they came in and used explosives and stuff in there, and for those of us who flew these unarmed airplanes, it was an exciting and noisy night.
Yeah. So how long did that
just
last?
Probably the whole thing lasted maybe 20 minutes. Fortunately, we had some ramp guards who, everybody was armed, but we had some guards who knew how to use their weapons. So when when all this happened, they obviously were alerted to the noise and came around the corner, and here was this little team of guys trying to get organized and what to do next, and our guard came upon them and was able to save the airplanes.
Did you lose anyone?
No, we lost an airplane, partly. It would have to be my airplane, which was a little, they threw an explosive into the thing, and we had these big barriers that the airplanes were sort of backed into, and it hung up on top of them, and it was a shaped explosive, and it blew down and reflected up off the concrete. And about the back third of the airplane looked like it was corrugated afterwards from the explosion.
Wow.
And there were little, shrapnel holes and stuff in the airplane. So the airplane had to, they made the airplane safe to fly one time, and they flew it to a major repair base in Japan so that it could be fixed. And,
so that was the only casualty of that attack?
That was the only casualty. We were very lucky. Very lucky.
Was that the only?
Oh, a couple times we would get rocket attacks and things like that. We had a flak vest that we, and a helmet and stuff like that we. They would always come at these wonderful times, like 3:30 in the morning, whatever that was. And I got sort of an explosion came through, a rocket came in, and the explosion sort of knocked me out of my bed onto the floor.
Wow.
And I grabbed my helmet and grabbed my vest and run down to a sandbag bunker area that we would sort of sit in there and huddle.
Wow. So yeah, I guess, did you ever see anybody get wounded or?
No, I didn't. One of the things I did do was I took volunteer to do this. This was the corpsmen, the medics, would go off base and out into the villages and help treat people, and they would need guards to go with them, and I volunteered to do that once.
Oh wow!
So I went out, and it was, to me, it was extremely meaningful. It was interesting. One of the big realities was tuberculosis.
Oh yeah.
Very common. And so they would find that they would be treating a lot of things like that out there.
Who were you treating?
I'm sorry?
Who were you treating? Like what?
The natives, the villagers.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just part of the goodwill that that they were trying to go through, and so it was a community relations thing.
Yeah. Were you generally successful doing that, or did you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we changed all that many minds, but yes, we were successful.
That's cool. That's really interesting. And then, how did you learn about or receive information about the war in that time?
Well, we got news feeds every day through the little message graphic kinds of things, general news things that were posted around that we could all read.
Yeah.
And then you'd get the Armed Forces newspaper, Armed Forces radio things, and that was, that's you get your feed.
Yeah.
We didn't find out about specific operations in very much real time. We heard about them, but usually delayed by about a few days at least.
Right.
Sometimes longer.
Right. And then I guess you said a few, but is there any more like specific experiences from the Vietnam War that you can't forget, or like your most vivid memories? Or
remember, I told you we were in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Right.
They were not real friendly toward the military.
Really? Like the
people, the civilians. And so we were told, going to and from our home to the base, to not stop anymore. Because we were in uniform.
Oh.
there were some incidences, not to me personally, but there were some incidences in the area of people being harassed because they were in uniform and the war was unpopular. So they were convenient targets.
Yeah.
So you get, yelled at, spat upon, things thrown to you, things like that. So the advice was, don't stop, go directly home, change clothes, then go to the grocery store.
Yeah. Interesting. Did anyone ever find you out, I guess, like out of uniform? Because I know in that era there's like a big difference between the hair.
My neighbors all knew I was
military,
and I wasn't trying to hide that.
Yeah.
It's just that the admonishment was that to be careful because we didn't want to invite this. And I remember I was going to be gone, and I had a wife and a daughter there that I wasn't anxious for them to be harassed while I was gone and not around to do anything.
Right.
Although I will say that our wonderful neighbors, most of whom we're still close friends with, all looked out for one another while we were there. We were all raising families about the same age.
Interesting. That's so crazy to think, like, especially now how we respect military so much.
Is it really all that crazy?
I guess not.
After this election?
Right. I suppose, but just like I feel like military is kind of a taboo to harass, right? From at least the way I grew up, like you respect the military no matter what, even if we don't agree.
But yours is not an uninfluenced. I mean, if you grew up in a non-military home, and particularly now in the age of all volunteer force, in terms of people don't serve unless they volunteer, then you might not understand.
True. Interesting perspectives. And then, could you describe the atmosphere? I guess you kind of talked about this, but of what people were feeling during the war. Was it super tense, like all the time?
No, not doing what I did. I mean, if I had been on board a ship, sailing, like your dad, and aircraft carrier, things like that, it's a different kind of operation. But we were aware that we could be called to do semi-dangerous things. We were aware that we carried weapons that could be used. All of that. So that sort of keeps you sober and focused on what you're trying to do. But other than that, it was relatively normal and calm. I was obviously aware of what was going on in the world around me. But I couldn't do anything about it. It's just the way it was.
Yeah, interesting. So like you said, world going on around you. How did you identify civilians treating each other during the war? Did you recognize some of that, like tension?
There was just as much split then as there is now. Because there were cases of there were people who believed in it, who never questioned it, who said, well, the government says so, it must be true. And then there were those who said, well, the government said so, so it can't be true. And they were just as polarized as they are now in terms of what they're trying to do. And that's something that is difficult to get used to. And if you listen, just as the case now, if you listen to all of the words, you can see that there's some legitimacy in both points of view.
Yeah, it's important. So
it's a challenge. It was a challenge then. It's a challenge now. I mean, but at least I can relate to it. But it's hard to imagine. It didn't cause me a lot of tension. It caused my wife probably more anxiety than me because of her responsibilities of being a mom and trying to keep a hold of everything together when I was gone.
Right.
I give her all the credit in the world. She did things. I changed duty stations. I was in a squadron. I was first assigned to a squadron in Hawaii.
Okay.
And shortly after I went to that squadron, the Navy operational force downsized and my squadron got decommissioned. And they came through and said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I originally chose to go to Moffett Field in California. I said, I'd like to go back there, I guess, because we hadn't been there for just a short period of time. So sure enough, I got orders back to the squadron at Moffett Field. My wife, after I got my wings and got my training, the squadron was deployed in Okinawa, Japan, and everybody, they were only going to be there for another 6-8 weeks, and I had an option. I could have stayed, I could have just gone to Hawaii and waited for the squadron to come home. Yeah. But everybody that knew anything said that's all they're going to be talking about is that deployment.
Right.
So you're going to be out of it if you don't go. So I went. Well, so wife with 2-month-old first child.
Yeah.
This is wife who had never been in the service either, or never gone through it. Has to get herself and baby moved out of quarters in California all the way to Hawaii, ship our car, take delivery of the household goods, move into base housing.
Oh my gosh.
None of these experiences she'd ever had in her life.
Yeah.
And I have to give her all the credit in the world. To this day, I can't figure out how she did all of that.
Yeah. And didn't you say you moved like 10 times?
Yeah, but that was almost before that, because what happened was I was going through flight training, and so you'd go through a phase of flight training, and it would be 4 months long. Okay. So then you'd move again.
Oh, okay.
And it'd be another 2 months, and then you'd move again.
Yeah.
And ultimately, then I got stationed. Then I got stationed in Hawaii, and I thought I was going to be there for 3 years. The squadron gets decommissioned, so we come back, move again, back to California.
Yeah.
Settled into a house there. That was fine. Then after that, it was graduate school. It was another move down a little bit further south in California, and then out to the East Coast, because I was then stationed southeast of Washington, D.C., and then ultimately up to Washington, D.C. So
a lot of moving.
Yeah. My wife became very good at packing and labeling boxes.
There you go. That's so cool. And then how often did you see, I guess, your parents, like after you left the house?
Again, because I was the only child, they would travel, or it was a little easier for them to travel. We would make every effort that we could for them. When I was at graduate school, our second daughter was born, and both mothers and fathers and stuff like that came out to Monterey, California, where I was in school, visited everybody, or did the typical, post-baby visits to mom and dad. But it was we'd see them once or twice a year at least. It wasn't necessarily holidays, it was associated usually with events going on in our life.
Right.
And they'd take us whenever they could get us.
Yeah. How many kids do you have?
2.
You have the 2, okay.
Two kids, 3 grandkids, and 1 great.
That is so cool. That's so awesome. Okay, so we kind of tangented. That's okay. Okay, here's an interesting question. If you could explain the war in one word, what would it be and why?
Confusing.
Just cause.
Both for those of us who were involved in it directly, and for those who were just around the edges trying to understand.
Yeah, confusing.
The vision was never clear. The glasses that we were looking through were cloudy and dirty, and the picture was not as good as it should have been. That we didn't have, again, nowadays the social media thing, you don't know when you're hearing, reading the truth either. I mean, it's still, it's on the internet must be true kind of thing. We all know that that's not the case. But, so there's more information is not better. Better information is better.
Right. And you just had mushy information.
We just didn't know.
Yeah.
And, we had to be smart, use common sense. We had to sort of filter everything as we saw it too. And you begin to understand, for example, the biases of the news media. Right. Which outlets are more conservative, which are more liberal, which tend to. It wasn't so much errors of commission. It wasn't like they were lying.
Yeah.
It was just they were just leaving things out. and you had to figure that out.
Yeah. Like what kind of stuff do you remember? Like what kind of things?
Well, they'd tell you most of the story.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't give you the background. They wouldn't take the time. This was the era when the 30-second sound bites sort of came into vogue.
Cut the part out you are.
And so they don't have time to give you the whole story.
Yeah.
So they just give you what they consider to be the highlights. Of course, they have to sell more airtime.
Right.
So that becomes, it has to be kind of sensational.
Yeah.
Big attack on such and such, and okay.
Yeah. Do you remember the channel or the outlet that you guys listened to or trusted the most?
We really moved around on the TV a lot.
Yeah.
Nowadays I listen more to PBS, but that's just because what I found is that they take more time and their news accounts are more balanced. But and I've just figured that out after a lot of years of listening to this.
Interesting. That's cool. So then I guess you kind of touched on your parents came around to visit you, but how did you stay in touch with your family other than that?
This was back in the era of long distance phone calls.
Oh,
no cell phones.
Yeah.
And so when we were out in Hawaii, for example, we had to be very careful to coordinate that with time zones.
Okay.
So we would come up and plan a time to talk to one another, and we'd send letters back and forth to get ready for it. So then we would do it. And nowadays you just set something up with your smartphone and text and so forth, and you'd be ready to go. But we did that. We sent when I was overseas. We would exchange little reel-to-reel tapes.
Really?
Yeah. Everybody had a little tape recorder. Probably as big as your notebook here, not as big or much bigger than that. But and you'd record a tape, and then you'd put the tape in the mail.
Really?
And so you'd send tapes back and forth, so that people could hear your voice and hear a little bit more of a story. And with the parents, that was important because I didn't call them from Vietnam or the Philippines or whatever. I would try to get a hold of my wife occasionally, but that was challenging. So.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I bet that those coming around kind of gave a new perspective to the war too, because I think before this there wasn't so much video opportunity.
Well, phone was all paper. The video coverage that occurred during Vietnam was news video. Yeah. And it was a newsreel kind of thing, except it was a little faster than World War II or Korea, where that was real film. Right. This was videotape that they would go through and put things together.
That's cool. That's really cool. So what kind of stuff did you do for fun during the war?
When?
Did you not have any fun? So when you were deployed and when you were working?
Trying to get involved with sports.
Yeah, they have
little games and softball, whatnot, football, whatnot. Yeah. Then we'd it was like to listen to music. Yeah. The Philippines were blessed with a lot of interesting musicians who would try to copy everything about a particular vocal group. Yeah. So this group of Filipinos would come out on stage, and all of a sudden, in a snap of the fingers, they would be the Beatles.
Oh wow!
Or any other artist that they could be, and they would sound just like them.
That's cool.
And so we did that. There was, we would go. We stayed on base a lot. And we would go to the officers' club or the enlisted clubs, officers' club in my case, and we would socialize there, take meals there, and gather around the bar and tell lies to each other and whatnot as we go through. And then we would go out into the local towns. Right outside of the base, invariably in the Philippines, there were several blocks of like bars and little restaurants restaurants and things like that everybody would go out to. In fact, it was sort of interesting when I was in the Philippines. My first deployment was to a base there called Sangley Point. Well, on the second time I went over there, I hadn't been there but about a month and a half, and they closed Sangley Point and they moved us across Manila Bay to another base called QB Point. Well, within a week, all of the bars that had been outside of Sangley Point were suddenly over out of QB Point.
Very directly related to all of you guys.
Yep. So all the familiar faces and things like that were all there. So
so fun.
Yeah, it was. They're business people too, and they knew where their money was coming from. So.
From you? That's cool. So I guess then, like after the war, do you remember the day you got to go home?
Well, yes. I came off my last deployment. It was so I have my first deployment that I was on over there. Was when I was stationed in Okinawa, but when I came home, the squadron was in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So I have a wonderful picture. My wife made matching outfits for herself and for the baby, and we had leis and things like that. Greet us when we came off. Leis for me and for them.
So cool.
The other ones were not quite that ceremonial, but we had the squadron wouldn't come home all at one time. What happened is that because of the kind of airplane that we flew, we would come home in groups of 2 or 3 airplanes, and so there was a little less of an event, except for those who were directly involved. But it was just so nice, you get back, and then you have to go through this whole reacquainting process of getting together with, making friends again with your spouse and with the children who hadn't seen you for 6 months and all that sort of thing. You don't want them to be afraid of you because there's this strange guy who just showed up here.
So what was, I guess, the longest time you were away? Because I guess you said you were
6 months. 6 months at a time, give or take a couple of weeks, but generally speaking, 6 months were our deployments.
Okay.
That was pretty long.
Okay. Cool. That's awesome. And then after you got back home, how were the soldiers treated? Like, did you get proper care from the government, I guess, and then also from like civilians?
The government was fine, but as I told you, the idea of being in the San Francisco Bay Area was difficult.
Yeah.
Because the atmosphere there was still a fairly significant and vocal anti-war group. So you just had to be alert, on your toes.
And how old were you when you were done?
Well, let's see. My first deployment was in 1969, so I was 23, 24 when I went. And the last one was in 1972. I came the winter of 72. I finished up with that squadron and went off to graduate school. So that was a little bit.
And when you were done, did you know you weren't going to re-enlist or go back?
Well, I re-enlisted. Think about that.
A few times.
For officers, it's a little different. For enlisted people, that's what they call it, enlistment. You sign a contract to go off and do this. For officers, you take a commission and use, quote, serve, and I'm using my air quotes here, at the pleasure of the president.
Okay.
So you have to resign to stop. You have to resign your commission. Now, the nature of the service is that all the schooling and training that we got kept adding years onto our service. My graduate school, my time at the academy, my flight training, all of that stuff added time. I couldn't even consider getting out for at least 9 years.
Wow.
Okay, and then I chose to stay longer because I was having a good time. But my decision to get out when I finally did was based upon other factors and going out at the time. And I came immediately hooked up here with the reserves in the Twin Cities, and finished up that way, just like your dad. I finished up as a captain. Yeah.
What did you study at graduate school?
Operations analysis, sort of an applied math degree.
And where did you go to graduate school?
Let me take that back. I was ops analysis at the academy. At graduate school, I was in systems acquisition management, which is sort of an MBA in Navy business.
Okay.
And that was at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California.
Okay, so they have that all set up. That's cool. And then once the war was over, did life return to normal, or were things kind of permanently changed in society and the community?
The world, certainly the world had changed. I mean, the draft is over. We're in an all-volunteer force now. That was a huge change in terms of attitude. Remember that the draft was going on during Vietnam, so every group of 18-year-olds, guys at that point in time, not girls, had their number.
Yeah.
And they had this lottery every year. And depending upon where your number came up, you were either going to be called or you weren't. You could get exemptions for going to school or certain situations, medical if you were not fit, but that went away.
Yeah.
And that was a big change in terms of the overall atmosphere that was going on. In fact, I think it's been a dramatic change ever since then. Personal belief or bias is I believe that some type of service, government service, something like that, should be something that everybody does. Not necessarily military, but something.
Yeah.
Because I think it's an opportunity to go out and gain some experience that you wouldn't otherwise get.
I agree. Interesting. So you didn't get drafted, you chose to go.
I got the appointment to Naval Academy. I competed for that.
Yeah.
Because the way that works is that all other service academies to this day, in fact your dad and I spent last Saturday over in Senator Franklin's office doing that. But to this day, what happens is that the kids apply to the academy, and they still have to obtain an appointment. Every senator and every congressman can have 5 people at any one of the academies at a time. So they have these appointments that they hand out within their area. Like a congressman, like my congressman is Eric Paulson. So Eric Paulson has 5 people at the Naval Academy right now, and at West Point, and 5 at Air Force. And so the kids compete for it. They're very, very competitive. Right now, they had, let's say, 11 or 12,000 people apply for 1,200 spots.
Right. It's a lot.
and because of that degree of competition, the kids are all very bright. They're very involved, very mature in leadership kinds of things. They're really extraordinary. Well, same kind of thing. Maybe not to that degree because I don't want to put myself in that extraordinary class. But
you were.
But that happened back then, and so I got an appointment from a congressman to go there. And I had been recruited. They had gone after me to play football too. But that wasn't how I got my appointment. That's just what I did.
Yeah. Did you know anyone that was drafted that maybe didn't really want to go to war?
Sure.
Yeah. That's probably crazy. I feel like that'd be really scary.
Well, it happened. That was just the environment at the time. Your number was called. And I also know some guys who lucked out because their number was too high. They didn't get back.
Yeah. Are there some people, I guess, go to college or something and don't have to go? And then, what was day-to-day life like after the war was over? How did people treat each other? How long would you say that tension of some people like the war, some people, how long would you say that kept going?
Let's talk about the history of the time. You've got
it was a pretty important time.
You've got Johnson and then Nixon after that, and all those things. So Watergate and all that stuff occurred historically. So people wanted to forget about Vietnam. It was not a pleasant experience for the American public in general. And so any distraction, any excuse to not think about it, to think about something else, they took.
Yeah.
So the idea was, let's put this behind us and let's go on to do whatever it is we're going to do with the rest of our life.
Right.
From my standpoint, I was still in the Navy, so it didn't make any difference to me. I just had, I got to do assignment, and off I went.
Yeah. So I guess that was kind of my next question was, after the war was over, you stayed within the military. Like, what was your new job?
Well, first I did graduate school.
Yeah.
As I said, that was a couple of years.
Yep.
I got my master's degree. Then I took a position with the Operational Test and Evaluation Force.
Okay.
So I went off flying the same airplane that I used to fly, but now I was testing new versions on it, changes, upgrades, things like that, to see if they were, if they were good, if they worked, if they did all the things that they were supposed to do. Mm-hmm. Did that for 3 years down in southeast of Washington, D.C. And then I got an assignment at the Naval Air Systems Command, which is the headquarters that buys all of the stuff associated with airplanes.
Yeah. Interesting.
So my Navy businessman degree that I went to graduate school for got used actually in both of those situations.
Yeah. So you used all that. That's really cool. And then I guess, like, looking back from today, 2016, what do you think we could have done differently in Vietnam? Do you think we could have done anything alternatively to make me have a better outcome?
Well, I have some first impressions, but in thinking about them, as I'm pondering this for a minute, the reality is that some of my impressions are influenced by what was available at the time in terms of technology and media and stuff like that. I'm very much in favor of transparency. And I think that what we could have done to try to be more transparent would have been helpful to everybody, to properly calibrate this. We need that to help, frankly, we need that as citizens to help keep our politicians in line.
Yeah.
Because the politicians, if the world is not transparent, the politicians can go off and do crazy things on their own, and nobody's there to provide check and balance for that. I think that we, as normal rank and file people out here trying to get by, need to have an understanding of what's going on so that we can properly do our role.
Yeah.
But given what was available at the time, that's a tough one.
It's hard.
It's a complex question. That's why I'm asking.
It is.
It's not an easy question to answer. I guess just education and information to everybody as much as possible.
Yeah.
A chance to debate and argue about it. I tend to be resistant to simplistic answers for complex questions. I don't like it. And yet we all tend to do that because we're all conditioned by the 10-second soundbite.
Yeah. No, that's a good answer. Well, and if you think of anything later, you can just let me know. You can email me or something. What lessons did you learn from that time that you want maybe other people to know about that era or just your history in general? Anything you'd want to...
We were trained in the military to work with and lead people, and our lives depended on it. And you became very, very aware of that. So that the point is that the idea was take care of your people because they will take care of you. And that was a very serious and very important lesson to know. Working with people in an effective way was really the key.
Yeah.
The lone operator out there, there's not that many of them doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the guys who flew planes like your dad did off the carriers were kind of out there by themselves, but the whole point is that the whole squadron would do this. So there would be 2 or 3 or 4 planes that were flying together, one guy in each airplane.
Yeah.
But they still had to do things in a coordinated fashion, and they still had the whole team of people on the ship who were trying to get them off and back safely.
Yeah.
So it's appreciating the value of wanting to work with people, I think, is the biggest thing.
I agree. That's really cool. And then have your views on the war changed over time, or are they pretty similar to what they were back when you were involved?
No, they're not. They have changed because with the benefit of history and hindsight, I can see things now that were not apparent to me at the time. Not that I would have done anything differently, but my attitude might have changed. I think that's the biggest thing. I'm a student of history. I like to study this stuff, and so I want to know what's going on and what the truth is as close to it as I can figure out.
Yeah. In what ways do you think you would have changed your attitudes, or what things have you learned?
I think there were several things that were contrived events, and they were misrepresented for a while at the time. That then spawned a whole series of other things after them. That had we known the real reason behind this initial event, the other things that came afterwards might not have been handled in the same way.
Right.
Again, that's this open, honest, and society. It is offensive to me when some people in the government sometimes take the position that it's like the old A Few Good Men movie where Tom Cruise says, "Well, you can't handle the truth." Okay, or Jack Nicholson, I guess, said that to Tom Cruise. Well, the same kind of thing here. I mean, the attitude is, okay, well, we civilians can't handle the truth. We wouldn't react well. Try me.
Don't we deserve the truth, kind of a thing?
I do. Don't. I'm not stupid. I'm a thoughtful person. I'm not going to go crazy just because I understand the circumstances. Try me.
I agree. It's a really interesting perspective. And then you kind of touched on this before, but what kind of parallels between our current, I guess, international or domestic aggressions and those during Vietnam do you see kind of now?
Well, first of all, we're in the same situation in many ways for different reasons. Back then, we didn't have the technology or the tools to get all of this stuff. Now we have the technology and the tools, but because of other pressures, the media outlets don't give us the full story. So the result is that you still only get part of the story, and so you're still not informed enough to make a solid decision or think your way through it. So it's a parallel in a way, but for different reasons that you come to this point. I think that, as I say, I believe that we are capable of a lot more reasoning and thought if we have the information to think our way through. I hate to see, I don't like the country being divided now, and I don't like the war being part of it. This all-volunteer force situation that we're in right now, the problem that I see with this situation is that because of this, there's such a small percentage of our population that is serving in the military now and has military experience. And that's okay with everybody else because they don't want to take part of it. Well, okay, but then you're just not going to understand what's going on. So I wish there was a little bit better, broader understanding of what's going on out there. I mean, we hear in the news all the time, so many people got blown up by an IED.
But no one knows what that really means.
It's hard.
And then I guess, how do you think the war overall affected you as a person and your outlook shaped you, I guess?
Probably made me a little bit more realistic about things going on in the world. My whole military service, war included, gave me a much different worldview. There is an awful lot going on outside of the borders of the United States. And I love traveling. I love to go to different countries and meet different people and all that sort of thing. And a lot of that travel was facilitated because I was in the service. Now, the war situation, that was sort of an extreme, because there I was traveling over a situation and carrying around, live weapons and whatnot. So you gotta use your head out here. Don't go crazy. But worldview, I think, is the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, that's like all the questions I had on my sheet. But I guess, is there any other like lessons or experiences or stories or anything that you would want to talk about or share?
Let's see. Well, in that time frame, I got to chase the very first Soviet ballistic missile submarine that came off the West Coast.
Really?
Yeah. We all have submarines that patrol off of other people's coasts all the time. And the Russians Soviets at that time had submarines off the East Coast for a couple of years before they ever put any off the West Coast. And because our squadrons were all equipped to go out and chase these things, we learned that they were getting ready to put their first patrol out. So we went out there to find and track them. So we did.
Yeah.
All the way from the Aleutian Islands, where we came through, and all the way down off of somewhere between. We go back and forth between Los Angeles and San Francisco on a big racetrack pattern off the coast.
Yeah.
It was get your attention when you're out there. You throw those listening devices into the water, and we got so that we were putting them in less than a quarter of a mile away from where the submarine was. And wander around through these lines of these things that we would have lined up.
Yeah.
Going through, and we would record everything that was going on, and you could hear when people would go back and forth in the submarine, walk back and forth.
Can you hear that?
It tends to change the balance of the submarine a little bit. Where they have these like wings going out to the side. Well, they adjust it very subtly, just a little bit to keep the thing balanced, so that you're staying at the same depth all the time. We could hear them when they would go through that. You could practically hear them talking.
They never noticed that I was there?
Well, they may have known we were there, but there was nothing to do about it.
Yeah.
Any more than we could do anything about that. I tell you what scared me, what gave me a lot of respect for the situation we were in, and the amount of that we had going. When I was going through training, the airplane that I flew actually carried nuclear weapons.
Wow, really?
They were depth bombs.
They were what?
Depth bombs.
Okay.
Depth charges, nuclear depth charges, to be correct. And one of the things that the instructor said during the course of the training that really got my attention was, he said, okay, all you P3 guys flying around in your little 4-inch control plane, he said, think about this one. He said, the Cold War is heating up. Tensions are rising between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And it's reached a point where you've got to make a point. So, we know where their submarine is off the coast.
Yeah.
Let's load up that P3 with one of these things and go out and take them out. Now, in doing that, you make your point. Everybody, with all their satellite coverage and everything else, knows exactly what goes on. You harm the least amount of the environment in the course of doing it. And the more I thought about that, the more plausible that became. It scared the Jesus out. I said, oh my God. I said, I could be out here and be the one who starts World War III.
No pressure.
And that always stuck with me. It's an awesome responsibility.
Right.
Truly awesome in the truest sense of the word.
Yeah. You didn't do it though?
But would I do it if I was told?
Yeah.
Sure.
But they never told you to.
Oh, heavens not. No.
Wow.
No.
Did you ever take out the Russian submarine? You just sat there?
Well, we would monitor them, until their entire patrol, and then they'd go off and be relieved by another one that would come down.
Huh.
They are off our coast constantly, off of both coasts.
Yeah. So did you just then generally just like monitor submarines?
Yeah, the idea was to
Rarely
track
took
them,
them.
make sure that you know where they are, because submarine, they when they're in their environment underneath the surface, hard to find.
Yeah.
And yet they're very formidable opponents.
Right.
Like, the aircraft carriers that your dad flew on.
Yeah.
Well, that's a prime target.
Yeah.
So the Russians always tried to have one or more, keeping track of every single aircraft.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting.
And we all knew it. It was just a matter of, do we know it well enough to know exactly where they are, so that if it became necessary to take them out so that we could go on and do our job, we could do that.
Yeah. How many did you take any submarines out?
No, we fortunately, I say this sincerely.
Yeah.
We were trained to do that. We had the capability of doing that. We were never asked to do that, and I'm glad.
Yeah. But you did drop bombs on other things, didn't you say you used other types of weapons on?
We could have bombs or rockets or mines.
Yeah.
Things like that we could use.
But you just didn't use anything? Ever?
I didn't. During the Vietnam era, there were a couple of squadrons. It's messing up your recording. We would have that would launch an air-to-surface wire-guided missile that would take out a small boat.
Yeah.
Carrying guns down to the Viet Cong, something like that.
So you do that type of stuff.
When I was, one of the missions that I had was way up at the northern part of the patrol area, up in the north part of the South China Sea, up not too far off coast of Vietnam, just 50, 60 miles. What the Viet Cong, or what the North Vietnamese would do, is they would use fishing trawlers to haul it in. But we knew what their fishing trawlers all looked like. And of course they would go out because these trawlers would all go out as sort of a fleet into the fishing areas, and you'd come up on this thing and there would be 50 or 60 of them out there, and you had to sort them out. And I did that one time, and sure enough, here was one of the newest and fastest of the gun-running trawlers that was out there. And so again, we're on the radio talking back to home, and they said, maintain contact until you're relieved. So we did. So we stayed out there. We knew which one of these many contacts it was, and we kept track of that one. So they weren't going anywhere at that particular point in time.
Yeah.
What they would do is, under cover of darkness or a rainstorm, they would then dash and go on further south. So we stayed out there. That particular one was interesting because we didn't get relieved. The airplanes that they were going to send out for us all were breaking. And so they kept saying, "Can you stay a little longer? Can you stay a little longer?"
And you're just like,
we're running out of gas. So we were sort of saying, but we could. Finally, I said, we had to go home. So we went home. From where we were, Cam Bay was 200 miles.
yeah.
We flew a straight line from where we were to Cam Bay, lined up with the runway.
And you just...
And we touched down, taxied off the runway, and one of our engines quit because of one of our 4 engines quit because of lack of gas.
Ooh, so you just made it. That's something.
15.2 hours.
In the air. So is that the longest?
It's the longest flight I ever had. The inside of the airplane tends to start getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It feels like it does.
Especially when you're worried about not being able to get back.
Well, I mean, we were all, running out our little calculators and looking at all the gauges and stuff like that. And of course, the gauges are pretty accurate, but not perfect.
Yeah.
It's like the gas gauge for your car.
Right. You don't really know.
When that light comes on, says you're on low fuel, how much you have left?
You never know. Sometimes they give you more. So, and I guess before you talked about, guess not no one that you specifically flew with, but you said you like lost friends and stuff. Like, who was that, and how did you find word of that, and how like what happened?
Classmates. I lost a couple of classmates who were shot down.
Yeah.
I lost a couple of classmates that just crashed. One in the Mediterranean during the Vietnam War.
Really?
Yeah. It was flying an airplane that was an A-7. It was a single piloted airplane that was used for dropping bombs and things like that. And of course, we'll never know because we didn't talk about it. But he just flew right straight into the water, and the idea was that he was on a bombing run, and he got fixated on the target.
Yeah.
And didn't pull up.
Oh wow. And I was just training?
Yep.
That's crazy.
It's part of the danger, I lost some friends who got shot down.
Yeah.
Over Vietnam.
Huh.
I lost a friend who was an astronaut on the Challenger.
Really?
He was a mission commander on the Challenger, Mike Smith.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I mean, there's people different ways.
Yeah. I guess when you go to school with people that are going directly into very dangerous fields.
Those are the pilots. And of course, I had friends who were Marines who got lost in combat that way.
Yeah.
Different things. Just nature of what we did makes you sad.
Yeah.
So, you have good friends. This guy who got target fixation was one of my very good friends.
It's interesting it's a very specific field that just becomes part of the job.
Yeah, that's not. I mean, I'm sure you probably have had people that you've known, for example, who might have gotten killed in car accidents or something.
Yeah.
And it's a shock, and you have to work your way through it. And depending upon how close you were to them, there's a certain amount of grieving that you have to go through. The same thing with this. It's just that this possibility of dying in this way is a little different.
Yeah.
Unique to what we do.
Huh. Well, okay, to end on a higher note, what would you say is the best experience, memory, lesson from that time that you can remember? Biggest takeaway, favorite thing?
I love the service because of the people.
Yeah.
And I'm an only child, so for me, I developed this, it's a cliche, I suppose, but this this brotherhood, these people that I served with, you become very close to them. Out there you learn all about their good points and their bad points. And, just like any other person that you have a relationship with. But to me, that's what as a life in the service. That's what it's all about.
Just that brotherhood.
My friends are all, of course, I'm older than your dad, so I'm about to go back in 2017 to my 50th class reunion.
There you go.
So.
Wow, that'll be fun.
And I've got wonderful friends. Many of them have had very successful military careers. Some of them have had extremely successful careers after the military.
Yeah.
And like chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah.
General Pace was a classmate of mine.
Yeah.
Well, to me, he's Pete. Colin Powell's Undersecretary of State. Well, it's rich. They're just people.
Yeah.
Just they're very bright and they've done wonderful things, and it's fun knowing these people, and even folks like your dad. Your dad's doing great stuff.
Yeah.
And knowing him, understanding what is going on, is great.
Huh. That's so cool. That's cool.
So just don't ever underestimate the relationships. That's all. The people part of it is the stuff. That's the respect.
That's cool. And that's an interesting thing to learn in war, because I feel like, or in the military, because I feel like a lot of people say you need to dehumanize when you're in war, but it's exactly the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's so intense and you have to bond, you have to stay together.
Yeah.
You'll find it interesting that when I chose to get off active duty, my wife wanted to stay.
Really?
It's not the typical reaction.
No.
She loved being a Navy wife. She really loved it.
Yeah.
And for her, it was something totally different for her life too, from what she had grown up with. And so it's just sort of, she was as much a part of my career, and the Navy was important to her too.
Yeah. Okay, wait, I lied. Maybe another question. How did you meet your wife?
She went to Edina High School. I went to St. Louis Park. And we both were in the same denomination for our church, the old Congregational Church.
There you go.
And we were both involved in the state youth groups. And however, our first face-to-face thing was sitting across the table like this at a student council thing where St. Louis Park was hosting the Edina kids, and we sat across the table at supper. We ended up, our first date was we went to my church to watch a movie, and then we went to her church where there was an ice cream social. And that all sounds very, very schmaltzy. But then she came every year at graduation during that week. There's a week of ceremonies, and we all would invite girls to come out for dates. But she's one of the few who came to all four that I had. We weren't dating when I went.
Yeah.
We got together the Christmas after I started, and sort of reacquainted ourselves as we did in high school.
Yeah.
And anyway.
That's so cute. That's fun. Okay, I was just curious. Okay, is there anything else you want to add, or
no.
you got everything?
You're gonna have to tell me how this comes out.
I will. I will let you know. It's all this stuff.